Have you ever noticed how sometimes a conversation with certain relatives can leave you feeling exhausted, drained of energy, and even emotionally drained? It's no coincidence. It happens more than you might think, and it has a simple explanation. The worst part is that the people we love the most may unwittingly be sabotaging our health and happiness. But calm down. It's not about pushing anyone away. It's about learning to protect your energy and emotional well-being. In this video, I'll reveal 3 types of relatives who, if we're not careful, can affect our quality of life. And the best part, I'll show you how to deal with them in a simple, respectful, and effective way. You'll discover how to preserve your emotional health without having to make drastic choices. Stay with me until the end and find out how you can improve your quality of life, enjoying every moment in a lighter and healthier way. The first type of relative you should stay away from is the negative relative. Have you ever noticed how the environment and the people around you can directly influence your state of mind? Just imagine you start the day in high spirits, with good intentions and a positive mindset, but when you talk to that relative, everything changes. Suddenly you feel your energy drain away, as if you were being sucked into a wave of pessimism. If this sounds familiar, you may be dealing with one of the most common types of people who unintentionally affect our balance, the chronic negative. These people have the incredible ability to turn any situation into a complaint. It doesn't matter if it's a beautiful day, if life is going their way, they will always find something wrong. What's worse is that this negativity is contagious. Have you ever noticed that, after being with someone like that, it seems like the world has become a little greyer? Scientific studies have shown that constant exposure to negative people can increase cortisol, the stress hormone, affecting our mental and physical health. Now think about this. Have you ever felt drained, exhausted, after spending time with a relative who only talks about what's wrong in life? No matter how hard you try to divert the subject to something positive, the person soon returns to focusing on the flaws, problems, and difficulties. The feeling of being in an endless conversation where the solution seems far away and the solution never arrives is something that can deeply affect our mind. It's as if, instead of supporting each other, this type of person is pulling you into a hole of negativity where they only talk about difficulties. And you may even find that at first you feel frustrated or worried by these conversations. But over time, if there are no limits, it starts to weigh on your mental health. Negativity is a kind of emotional poison, and the more you get away from it, the healthier and lighter you become. How does this constant wave of negativity affect your well-being? First of all, when we are exposed to a negative person, our brain starts to go into a state of alert. By constantly hearing about what's wrong in the world, our subconscious begins to focus on failures and difficulties. This alters our perspective on life, and instead of looking for solutions and possibilities, we become more likely to perceive obstacles and limitations. How can we protect ourselves from chronic negativity? The question that remains is, how can we protect ourselves from chronic negativity without creating conflicts or alienating the people we love? The key here is to set limits and focus on the positive. This doesn't mean being selfish or insensitive, but simply protecting your emotional health. Remember, your inner peace should be your priority. Here are some simple strategies for dealing with negative people. Redirect the conversation. Whenever you notice that the conversation is going in a negative direction, try to change the focus. Talk about something positive, something good that happened in your day, or share a happy moment. You'll be surprised how often this small effort can turn the situation around. Set clear limits. Don't be afraid to set limits. If the person starts complaining again, you can gently interrupt and say, "I understand, but I'd rather talk about something else now. Let's try to focus on what we can do to improve the situation." It's important to be firm, but in a gentle and respectful way. Practice gratitude. One of the most powerful ways to combat negativity is to practice gratitude. When you focus on the good things in life, you begin to see the world in a more positive light. This doesn't mean ignoring problems, but rather recognizing the blessings you have around you. The more you connect with the positive, the easier it is to protect yourself from those who try to drag your energy down. Turning negativity into opportunity. Of course, it can seem difficult to deal with negative people, especially when they are close relatives. But remember, you're not alone on this journey. We all go through challenging situations, and we can all learn to deal with these people better. Don't let other people's negativity steal your peace. With small changes in your behavior and attitudes, you can protect your energy and live a more balanced life. Now think about your own life. Do you have someone who is unintentionally draining your energy with negativity? Maybe it's time to take a step back and protect yourself. Setting boundaries can be the first step towards lasting well-being. And remember, you deserve to live in peace and happiness. Start today. Second type of relative, the excessive critic. Has it ever happened to you that you do something from the heart, dedicate yourself to a project, or even share an achievement with someone in your family, only to be greeted by a barrage of criticism? Sometimes the intention isn't to be mean, but the constant avalanche of criticism can undermine your confidence and, over time, affect your self-esteem. This is the behavior of the excessive critic, the kind of relative who always has something to point out, no matter how hard you try to do your best. This type of relative is not necessarily a malicious person. They often mean well, but their way of expressing themselves ends up creating an atmosphere of insecurity. They may point out flaws, suggest improvements, or even comment on what you've done, but the way they do it is not constructive. Instead of feeling motivated to improve, you end up feeling discouraged, as if nothing you do is good enough. Imagine you've made a delicious meal for the family, and when you serve it, you expect to see smiles and compliments. But what you hear is, "Oh, I thought the rice was a bit overdone. I think the seasoning could use more salt, right?" The feeling that the effort wasn't appreciated can be overwhelming. Even if the person's intention is simply to help, the emotional impact of such a comment can be profound, especially when it happens repeatedly. These small details, repeated over time, can create a pattern that undermines your self-confidence. If every time you share something with this person they find something to criticize, it becomes difficult to keep trying. Instead of feeling supported, you feel like you're constantly being judged. And this, over time, can affect your sense of self-worth. The impact of excessive criticism on self-esteem. How does excessive criticism affect self-esteem? To understand this, it's important to remember that our self-esteem is linked to how we perceive our own value. When we are in an environment of constant judgment, we begin to doubt our abilities. If our effort is never enough, we begin to question whether we are doing things correctly or whether we are really good enough. Henry, for example, had always loved gardening. He dedicated himself every day to tending his garden, planting new flowers and trying to learn more and more about the art of cultivation. But every time he showed his work to his aunt, she found something to criticize. "That plant doesn't look right, Henry. That vase could be a brighter colour. You should try pruning the flowers differently." No matter how hard he tried, the criticism was constant. Henry began to question whether his passion for gardening really made sense. He thought, "Am I doing it all wrong?" And over time, his self-esteem was undermined. The point here is not that criticism is always negative, but the constant tone and lack of recognition for achievements creates a sense of inadequacy. The excessive critic never seems satisfied with what you do. This creates a vicious circle. The more you try to please, the more criticism you receive, and the more insecure you become. How to deal with the excessive critic? Now, the question that many ask, how to deal with the excessive critic in a healthy way, without causing conflicts, but also without allowing it to affect their well-being. The first step is to understand that you don't have to accept all criticism personally. Often, criticism is a reflection of the insecurities of those who make it, and have nothing to do with what you are actually doing. Here are some strategies you can use to deal with an overcritical in an effective way. 1. Separate criticism from your identity. Remember that criticism does not define who you are. When someone tells you something negative, remember that you are more than what they are pointing out. Criticism does not diminish your personal worth. You have the right to be proud of what you do, regardless of other people's opinion. 2. Communicate your needs in form. Scarlett, sometimes people don't feel the impact of your words. Speak to the critic in an honest and gentle way. I understand your intentions and appreciate you want to help me, but I feel a little discouraged when I only see the negative side of things. Could you give me positive feedback as well, so I know what I'm doing right? 3rd, set limits for criticism. If the overcritic continues to point out faults consistently, even when it is not necessary, you have the right to set limits. I understand that you want to help me, but at this point I just need support and encouragement. This does not mean being rude, but being firm on what you need emotionally. Strike a balance between criticism and praise. We all need feedback, but it's important that it be balanced. If you get a review, try to focus on the praise and positive aspects as well. This helps maintain confidence and enthusiasm. Turning criticism into personal growth. One of the most powerful ways to deal with excessive criticism is to turn criticism into opportunities for personal growth. When you learn to listen to criticism in a constructive way, without letting it affect your self-esteem, you become stronger and more confident. However, if criticism becomes destructive and incessant, you need to have the courage to move away emotionally or even establish a healthy distance. Returning to Henry's affair, he decided to talk with his aunt about his feelings. As she explained how he felt, she surprisingly recognized that his words were affecting him more than she imagined. This made her reflect and change the way she communicated with him. She began to give genuine praise, as well as suggest small improvements in a more gentle and constructive way. Henry, in turn, felt much more motivated to continue with his passion for gardening and invest even more in his personal development. Remember, when someone is constantly criticizing you, you don't have to let it affect you deeply. Criticism is part of life, but it's how you react to it that really matters. With practice and patience, you can learn to listen, filter, and use criticism as fuel for your own growth and well-being. 3rd parent type, the controller. Have you ever felt like you were constantly being monitored, or worse still, guided by a relative who seems to have a manual of how your life should be? The controller is that kind of relative who, although he usually does it with good intention, feels a constant need to dominate all aspects of his life. From your career choices to the details of your day-to-day life, the controller always thinks he knows what's best for you, and without realizing it, ends up invading his personal and emotional space. The controller is not content to just give an opinion. He wants you to follow his guidelines to the letter, and this can be extremely exhausting. The problem is not in giving advice, but in how these advice are imposed. When controlling behavior becomes excessive, it can create a suffocating environment where you feel constantly pressured to make decisions based on the desires and expectations of others, rather than your own needs and dreams. If you have ever had the feeling that you can't make an important decision without consulting this relative and receiving a detailed analysis of each step of yours, you know exactly what it is to deal with a controller. This kind of relative not only invades your personal space, but also ends up making you question your own choices. Deep down, the controller doesn't trust his ability to do things on his own, and that can be deeply frustrating. When you are constantly directed by a controlling relative, your sense of freedom begins to fade. It is as if you are always walking towards a destination that you have not chosen, being pushed in the direction that another wants for you. This can affect your independence and create a cycle of emotional dependence. The controller may not realize it, but by insisting on making decisions for you, he may be causing you to doubt your own ability to choose. The big issue with the controller is not just your need to give advice or your insistence on guiding your choices, but the emotional impact that it may have on you. How does this affect the way you see yourself and your ability to make decisions? The controller often creates a climate of mistrust. You start to wonder, do I really know what is best for me? And this constant doubt can erode your self-confidence. In addition, the controller can cause a sense of guilt. When you don't follow his advice, he can make you feel wrong or guilty, as if you're making a bad decision. This type of emotional manipulation can undermine your peace of mind and happiness. Charlotte, a lady who loved to travel, spent years postponing the dream of knowing other countries because of her brother's controlling behaviour. Whenever she mentioned the idea of taking an international trip, he would say, "You won't be able to fly, and neither will you be able to change your time zone. It will be very tiring for you." Even though Charlotte was excited about the idea, she began to set aside her desires and postpone her trips, afraid of displeasing her brother and being influenced by the idea that he knew more about what would be good for her. This kind of pressure not only stole Charlotte's freedom, but also prevented her from having experiences that would make her happier and more fulfilled. Dealing with a controlling relative requires patience and, above all, courage to set clear boundaries. The main strategy here is to recognize that you have a right to be the owner of your own life. Here are some ways to deal with this behavior. 1. Set healthy boundaries. One of the most important steps is to learn how to say no with respect, but firmly. This does not mean being rude, but rather having the courage to defend your own choices. When a controlling relative starts to impose your opinion, you can respond politely by saying, "I understand your concern, but I've made my decision and feel good about it." Asserting your independence is essential to maintaining your peace of mind. 2. Don't take to the personal side. Remember that controlling behaviour usually comes from a place of concern. However, this does not mean that you need to accept this behaviour. Recognizing that this attitude is not about you, but about the control that the person wants to have, helps not internalize these attitudes in a negative way. 3. Find support in other sources. Sometimes dealing with a controlling relative can be a lonely challenge. Seeking support from others who understand your situation and respect your wishes can be very helpful. Sharing your feelings with friends or other family members who understand your point of view can help you maintain your confidence and continue with your decisions. Finally, it is important to remember that everyone has the right to make their own decisions and live the life they have chosen. The controller, although well-intentioned, often does not realize that it is interfering with the autonomy of others. With patience, scarlet communication, and respect for your own limits, you can learn to deal with this kind of relative in a healthy way, maintaining your freedom and peace of mind.